ladies and gentlemen, young people of North America and around the world. This is Benson Joseph once again coming at you from Kerala Christian Assembly, Toronto, at Youth with a Vision. We are in our second episode of SparkCast, the podcast that's dedicated to your questions, your concerns, bringing light to the things that you may not be able to speak about. We are privileged to be able to come at you in your homes, in your gyms, wherever you are, at work. You may be listening to us from anywhere or everywhere, but we're so grateful that you took this time to listen to us today, and we hope that you will be blessed by this next couple of minutes as we share some questions that are getting down to the bread and butter of what people are really thinking in the community and the young people of this community. I'm privileged to have Pastor Jaron Thomas with me again.
Thank you, Benson. What a joy to be with you this day. And we are back again at SparkCast.
Awesome. We have a number of questions that we received from you, our listeners, asking for us to talk about these things and to bring on some people who might be able to share some unique perspectives on some of the controversial issues of the day. I'm going to read one of them. This question is an anonymous question. We don't have someone who gave their name, but they asked, what does the Bible say about dating? Is it good or bad? What about dating outside of the faith? Do you have any general thoughts? What do you think, Pastor Jaron?
Good question. A question that we keep hearing from young people around the world. Wherever you go to India, you go to Middle East, you go to USA, you go to any part of the world, people will definitely have this question or something related to this question for sure on relationship and dating in particular. I think the big counter question we need to ask is, what's the purpose of dating? If dating is purpose-driven, and if it is just for fun, if it is not intentional, then I don't know if it is meaningful to even think about or ask this question about dating. I would want to think before we ask this question, we want to throw three big questions, like three things to think about. Number one would be the time factor. Like, how old should I be before I start dating? Don't you think that's a good question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great question. I think it's probably many of you who are listening right now probably have that same question, and some of you are maybe pondering whether you need to be pursuing a relationship. Maybe you have a great desire to have one,
right?
But you're trying to figure out whether this is the right time. And I think that's a great question. I think for me, I think what it really comes down to is the intentionality of why you're doing it. Just as you touched on, dating. I think, and especially when it comes to relationships with the opposite sex, when you're trying to have a romantic relationship, it should go somewhere. Right. I believe there should be an intention. I think that God made that model in the book of Genesis when he put a man and a woman together and they were together forever. It wasn't that Adam and Eve speed dated their way to each other.
That's right.
God made Eve for Adam. And I think that dating that is with the intent of finding your life partner, I believe that's God honoring, and I believe that God's okay with that.
Right.
And it is interesting because if you look at the Bible, there's a very different model. I don't know that people speed dated or had proposals, so to speak, the way that we do in our community, but they all did look only when they were ready to get married. I think that's something that you find common.
That's the key. Like if you are 15 and 16, and if you are asking this question, I want to ask you, when are you planning to get married? I mean, usually when I ask someone who is 16 and 17, I'll ask them you like this girl or boy, and when are you planning to get married? And usually they say not in the next 8 years, not in the next 10 years. And I'm like, you're going to wait next 10 years and you're going to be in a pure, holy relationship with this one person? That's nearly impossible. Like when you are 15 and 16. So the time factor is a big thing to deal with when you are asking this question on dating.
For sure.
Time factor. Or in other words, you say, I'm not putting an age at 24, 25, but if you completed your studies and you have a good job and you have resources to take care of your spouse and you're getting ready to get married, you're 25, 26, and you're thinking about dating, it makes more sense because that's very intentional. So the time factor gets a big tick. The time factor makes more sense in asking this question.
Sure. Now, I'm going to be a devil's advocate and shoot something at you that maybe some of our listeners are thinking. How do you know that you know somebody before you marry them if you only date them with the intent to get married and not just to know them as a person first? How would you approach that? Because I know I've actually heard from people who are
Right.
younger that are not yet married, but I've spoken to them on it.
Right.
And they say that they just can't get around the whole idea of having a proposal, even
Right.
if it's for 5 or 6 months or 7 months.
Right.
They don't think that that's actually enough time to figure out whether I want to spend the rest of my life with this person.
But the other question would be, what time frame would be enough? Enough to marry someone. I mean, what if you are given like 2 years to get to know somebody?
Sure.
Is that enough?
I'm sure there are some who would say that's not enough either. That's
That's
true.
not enough.
That's true.
It takes a lifetime to get to know each other. So, but the age factor or the time factor is big when you ask this question. The number two would be the social factor. We live in a society. We don't live in vacuum. Like, we have our parents, we have our mentors and leaders and pastors, and so I think it's important to get them involved when you are thinking of dating somebody. Like, it's time for you to get married. You are old enough, you are mature enough, and you have the resources to support a family. And then the next question would be like, how do I involve my immediate social relationship, like my parents or my mentors? It's important to get them involved. If they are with you and they pray for you and they want to see the best for you, so it's important that we think about the social factor.
Interesting. So that kind of touched a nerve in my head, and it just got me thinking. So would you say it's a wise thing to use this as a sort of litmus test of sorts?
Oh, yeah.
That if I'm not ready to disclose this to my parents
Yeah.
or to my pastor or youth pastor to ask them about the wisdom of this,
Right.
that maybe I shouldn't be pursuing what I'm thinking about right
Exactly. Then you're just playing around, just having fun, or maybe flirting. I don't know if that's going to head anywhere. Like, if you are serious, deliberate, intentional, and pure about dating with the purpose of getting married to someone, you would have no problem in sharing that with anybody. Like, someone whom you trust, your mentor, youth pastor, or your parents, right? And if they are with you in the same page, think through with them, discuss with them, brainstorm together. And I'm sure that'll give you a lot of wisdom before you make this important decision. Because this is perhaps the most important decision you will ever make.
Absolutely.
After your born-again experience.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This will either make you or break you.
That's true.
So this is not something which we want to play around, right? So
Would you say that in your experience, you are a youth pastor, you've worked with youth in Toronto, and also I know in the Middle East and also in India.
Right.
Would you find that most of our youth today are far too casual about that? Or would you say in your experience in the church that people are generally pretty level-headed and mature about that kind of decision?
now I think for teenagers to think about dating would be very, very casual and irresponsible, because I don't know if they are mature enough to get married. They are not of their own. Like, they lack resource, they lack education, they don't have a career. Their mind is not still stable. So thinking about marriage when you're 17, 18 is suicidal, very dangerous. Yeah. Then definitely the big factor would be the God factor.
Right.
And even if you think that it's time for you to get married, you have the support of your parents or your mentors or your leaders, you need to get the confirmation from the Lord. If you have no peace about it from God's word, from God, don't go ahead. Like, that peace, that conviction is so crucial. So I think these three factors will give you a lot of wisdom before we make this decision on dating or getting married to somebody.
Interesting. That's a good segue into the latter part of that question, which was about what our thoughts are. What should we think as Christians about dating outside of our faith? What are your thoughts on that, Pastor Jaron?
That scares me. Maybe it scares me because of those live examples which are flashing through my mind right now. I mean, I know young people right before my eyes who made decision to get married to somebody outside of our faith. somebody who is not a Christian. And even today, as I talk to them, as I chat with them, I can see and experience and feel the pain that they go through. They thought they can win this person because there was so much of love and there was so much going on between them, and that their spouse was ready to do anything for the other person. But nothing really happened as they progressed into marriage. And they still go through a lot of pain, and they still live as, as two different ideologies, philosophies. And this person who was a Christian is not anymore a passionate Christian, getting married to this non-believer. So I think that is very suicidal.
So you believe a very real risk factor for that would be that you as a Christian would then slip in your faith or compromise on the things you believe in for the sake of peace in your home.
High possibility. I would want to see it this way. Like, why would you want to get married to somebody who rebel against the lover of your soul? I mean, Jesus is number one for us if you are a Christian.
Right.
We love Jesus over and above anybody, everything else.
Right.
And if Jesus is the first love that you have, would you want to share the rest of your life with somebody who rebel against the lover of your soul, against the number one love of your soul? That does not make any sense to me.
So those two things are in conflict.
Yes.
They stand opposed to each other.
Right.
I think I understand where you're coming from. So then what would your advice be to maybe a young person that may be listening now that might actually be in a relationship with someone who's not a believer? Maybe parents don't know about it. Maybe the youth group doesn't know about it. But when they go to school after their classes, they're with somebody who does not go to church on Sunday, someone who does not know Jesus as the Lord of their life, and they have a romantic relationship with such a person, or they're even entertaining thoughts of maybe I want to marry this man or woman.
Right.
What would your advice be to them right now?
I would want to plead before them. If I could hold their legs and cry before them, I would do that. Please, before you proceed any further, hang in, stop on your track. If you love Jesus, if you claim to be a Christian, and if you follow Jesus faithfully, please stop right now, and before you go any further, go and talk to somebody, share your heart, tell them this is what is happening, I need guidance, I need direction. Please don't make any commitments, because you still have not made any commitments, you're still not engaged or married. Before you go any further, stop right now, before it's too late. That's my advice, that's my cry or plea to you, because we don't want to see you making wrong decision.
Right.
Yeah, that's so crucial. Yeah.
And of course, the Sunday school answer to this question, is there's clear precedent in Scripture for this as well, right? There's a verse that says that we're not to be yoked unequally with unbelievers. So that's actually Paul's advice from the New Testament. He says, "What fellowship has light with darkness?" And I think that's sometimes a hard thing to think about, because we don't necessarily think about the person that we're attracted to as darkness and us being light.
Right.
In fact, they're the love of our life at that moment, and we think the world of them. And it's very hard for us to equate them with being agents of the enemy to bring us down when we're in love with them, or that emotional connection is there. But wherever you are right now, you might be in your car right now, you might be in your bedroom, you might be in the gym right now listening to this. And if this is you, I want to encourage you to think very carefully on this verse. Paul's admonition, what fellowship has light with darkness? And sometimes that's the lie that we buy. And so that's how the enemy gets into our head and leads us down a way that we can't really come back from. Marriage is one of the most sacred, beautiful things that God ever created. It's the first institution he created, was that between Adam and Eve in marriage. And that's the one way the enemy can get at us. If you have a spouse that's a drag on your spiritual life, that does not share faith with you, that can destroy your family, and it can really change your generations after you, right?
Yeah,
your generation
that's so
after you.
true.
So there's much larger consequences.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree, Pastor Jared?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You're speaking truth. I mean, young people need to hear truth. Right? But it comes through love, covered in love. But what you just said is so true. This is so biblical. This is the core.
Right.
And growing up, you grew up here in Toronto, Canada.
That's right.
Like growing up in this city where you were exposed to all kind of temptation and everything was happening around you, like people dating, falling in love, and all those things were happening. How did you how was your life? How did you get married to Chrisanne? Like,
Right.
did you date, or how's the whole picture? Let's.
So this is now the first part of a 7-part series on how Benson met Chrisanne. No, I'm just joking. But that is a long story. But I will say that you did ask a very specific question about growing up in Toronto and being exposed to all of that. And I think all of you who are listening, if you're in North America, even now in the Middle East and India, it's there as well now. The Western ideal of we're not having these blind. You meet someone one week and then the next week you're married to them anymore. It's more organic. It's something where you meet somebody and over a course of time you decide whether you want to fall in love with this person and pursue a romantic relationship. And for me, growing up in this church, quite frankly, I think it's not a secret to anyone who's listening that dating is something that's pervasive throughout our young people, even in our church, in Malayali Pentecostal churches across North America. I think there are many of you who are probably listening right now who probably are in relationships with someone. People may know about it, people may not know about it, and that's fine. I mean, it does nothing to pretend that that doesn't exist. I was no exception. I grew up in a community where that was pervasive, where people in my Sunday school class or people that I knew that they were dating or they were very much pursuing people well before, the intentional time of marriage had come. And I did not do that, but that was not, I don't want to say that I would take great credit for it. I will not lie. There were times in my life where I thought, wow, everyone else has somebody. Why don't I do that? Right. And I think that's probably something, if everyone is honest with themselves, is probably thought at one time or another. There were times where I saw a lot of my good friends, even people who I thought were very strong in the faith and people who were very strong in the faith, they had their steadies. They had their person that they were convinced they were going to marry. And, of course, they didn't end up marrying those people. But of course, you can't help but feel alone when you think everyone else has somebody.
True.
And you realize everybody's finding their own person and I don't have my person. There were times where I would have been okay if someone came along, and I think that's the honest truth of it.
Oh, right.
And that is probably something I wouldn't have admitted, but it's the truth. And I think many people probably find themselves there. They think, okay, other people found other people because they're attractive or they're super smart, or maybe I'm just not attractive enough, and maybe that's where it is. It's not some godly principle that you're standing on to say that I don't want to get married. It's just like I haven't found my person yet.
Right.
And I think for me, that was really God just preserving me, not so much that I had some great character or some great conviction. And I knew in my head, I think I did have in the back of my mind that I didn't want to get to date somebody before I knew that I actually wanted to marry them.
So you're happy that you did not date someone when you were a teenager, or when you had those cravings to date someone or to...
Yeah, absolutely. I think in hindsight, absolutely. I think everyone has those cravings, right? If you don't, you're a liar, because God created us with those urges, right? I know maybe you're even 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13, all of a sudden your heart starts to beat faster when you see that first crush. You want to see them all the time. You just get faint and you start blushing when they come around, or you don't know how to. Your tongue gets tied. You don't know how to speak to them. And that happens over and over and over if you're a human being, because that attraction is God wired within us.
Wow.
But that's because God wants us to have that at a time of his choosing, when we're mature and ready for it. So, wherever you are, if you feel that, don't feel guilty about it. You might be a 12-year-old, 13-year-old. You might be feeling those things. There's nothing wrong with those feelings. Those are natural, God-given feelings. You should never feel that you need to push those down or that you should feel guilty or dirty because of that. That's something God put in you. But it's for another time. And it's about learning to train yourself and that discipline, knowing that, hey, this is something that I'm going to share with someone wonderful that God is going to bring into my life, but it's not right now. And I think I'm so grateful that even when those times I had those urges where I would have gladly probably said, okay, if someone came to me and asked, God preserved me so that I didn't have to.
And you thank God for that.
Absolutely. And what I have with Chris is a great, great thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I think that's what God intended for me.
Wow.
I'm so grateful for his preserving grace in my life.
A personal question. So Chrisanne... Was Chrisanne the first person whom you got to know closely?
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
sex?
I think as far as a romantic relationship, that's absolutely correct. So she was my first...
That's amazing.
My first and only love. So if you're listening, there's only you, baby. Yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
that's an amazing thing, for sure.
All right, quick 3 things when you think about dating. I think what we need to consider, along with the lines of what Benson said, is the temptation that can come along when you're dating. your body is going to go crazy, right? Like there will be deep cravings. So if you are dating someone, like, are you mature enough? Are you transparent enough to handle the temptation that come along with dating? So if you are a teenager, if you are not mature in the Lord, I think you need to say goodbye to dating. It's not the time. That's not the best thing for you now. The other thing is, like, use your single years wisely. Like, this is the time to use your energy, your love, serve people, prepare yourself to be a family man. Prepare yourself to be a good husband, good wife. Don't just waste your single years. Your single years are valuable. God needs you when you have all vibe and energy and strength for His glory. Because relationship involves so much time. It takes a lot of your time, isn't it true?
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes a lot of your time, resource, and emotions.
Yes.
It can deplete your emotion. If it is not intentional, wow, it can just take away everything from you. But if it is intentional and heading to marriage, making this important decision, it's wise.
Right.
And that's my take. Having said that, it's important that we get to know someone before getting married. Benson, you got to know Krusan for at least for a few months before you made the decision.
Yes,
right?
That's several months. I think
Right.
it was less than a year before we got married. But,
Right.
I think if many of you are listening come from the Malayali Pentecostal community, that's a pretty good amount of time. I think
Right.
a lot of times you're
Right.
put on the spot.
Yeah.
We were blessed in that nobody was rushing us per se. Our parents weren't beating us down to say yes right away because they were desperate or anything like that. And if you're in that stage, you might be a little bit older or further along in years, and your parents might be pushing you. I want to encourage you not to do that. Don't make impulsive decisions. Like Pastor said, this is the most important decision after salvation that you'll ever make. You want to make sure you get it right. You want to make sure, this is very tangible, practical advice. Make sure you have an argument. Make sure you know how to disagree with that person. Make sure you see the worst that you can see out of each other and know that you can still deal with that. A lot of times we let this whole emotional euphoria get the best of us. And then when real life hits us after marriage, we see this other person and we don't know who that person is. It freaks us out and it's something that knocks you on your heels and you don't ever quite come back from. And I think it's one thing to make sure you take the time to really know who you're going to marry.
So dating has its place and time. It is important. But the time factor is big, and your social factor, and definitely your direction and conviction from the Lord.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree. And one last thought just on that. You always want to make sure when you're single, work on yourself to be the best version of yourself that you can be, so that when you meet the person, you're ready to give them the best version of yourself with the strength of the Holy Spirit, right? You can't do that on your own strength. You certainly can't do that when you're 14, 15, or 18, or even 21. You've got to be able to really press into God. And I heard a beautiful quote that many of you might have heard, but it's so relevant and poignant. A man must be so, or a woman must be so pressed into Jesus, pressed into God, that he has to find the girl or man by seeking God first to find them.
Wow. That comes from Max Lucado.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Perfect. So that's a great thought, and it's something that I think is very relevant, and I hope that it ministered to you who are listening right now. We have several other questions. This is not actually the end of dating. We would be remiss to think that we could go over dating in 20 minutes and then that would be it. We're going to have many other folks, topic experts, so to speak, who are going to come in and speak on dating, share from their experience. Maybe some of you and some of our folks who are part of our community are going to be giving us more questions and more thoughts that we can expound upon. Please remember to send your questions to ywavsparkcast@gmail.com. We're only as good as the content that you guys give to us and the ideas that you guys spring on us. So please feel free to do that. We do have a couple of other questions. I'm going to let Pastor Jaron ask some of these questions and have you guys think about them. In the next coming weeks, we're going to talk about those and bring some folks who are knowledgeable on those subjects.
That's right. We're coming back with some crucial questions that was raised by some young people, our listeners. One question that we want to deal with is, how do we grow spiritually if we live in sin continually? That sounds an oxymoron.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but definitely something we want to talk about. How can we have a sincere relationship with Jesus to please Him? How do we resist the temptations of movies, gossip, and aimless life? Very real question, right? And how do you deal with Christian friends who drink or date? What's the best way to approach them? Another very raw, real question. All right, so we'll be back with you with many more questions.
Perfect. Yeah, and those are some great questions that we received. We want to hear more from you. So again, if you can send those questions to ywavsparkcast@gmail.com, we'd be happy to delve into some of these deep issues. And we also have a new person, not just Pastor Jaron or I, who are going to be speaking to you. We have a young man, Abraham Matthew, who's actually studying in apologetics at the University of Toronto. He's a very, very bright young man who is a future leader among our community in apologetics and defending the faith.
Absolutely. He'll be joining us in one of the coming weeks. A brilliant speaker. You don't want to miss him. He's going to come up with some very relevant, real life issues, questions that your atheist friends ask or your agnostic friends ask. You don't want to miss in the coming weeks listening to him.
Yeah, I actually have not met Abraham, so I am, along with all of you, waiting eagerly. I've heard great things about him. Pastor Jaron, he actually did come and speak to our youth at our church a couple times.
It was brilliant. He was talking about different worldviews and how we can be a Christian in the midst of different worldviews and the uniqueness of Christianity. It was amazing. So he's going to deal with one of such topics in the coming weeks.
Awesome. So we're so thankful that you guys joined us for this 25 to 30 minutes here. I pray that God will bless you this week and that you'll continue to press into Him, that you would fan into flame those spiritual gifts, that these questions that we ask will help and illuminate your mind and help you to follow Jesus more thoughtfully and more passionately in the days ahead. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.
God bless you. Cheers.